And I'm not sure he's any better a deal. And I don't think that people entirely realise that if you get rid of Trump, you don't get another election, you get the vice president.
Vice President Pence. Did Comey bother you, Rayburn? I mean, he cleared Hillary, then he reopened the inquiry into her, then he cleared her again at obvious cost to her chances of being elected.
Yeah. She was on track to win until he put out that thing, a few days before the election. But it's just, Donald Trump is just making this up as a reason to get rid of him because it's not convenient now.
But recently he had to correct that testimony to Congress about how Homer Aberdeen, Hillary Clinton's aide, forwarded the hundreds and thousands of emails, and it turned out that wasn't true. Doesn't that suggest the kind of very inability to do his job adroitly that Trump is citing?
Yeah, but just because he's bad at his job doesn't mean that's why Donald Trump is firing him.
Well, that's true.
Donald Trump is firing him because of his dealings with Russia.
Although people are saying Rod Rosenstein made the recommendation and he was confirmed by such an overwhelming majority in the Senate, respected by all, etc. There are two narratives here. I suppose you choose at this point which one you...
look at who else he's fired. He fired Sally Yates. Anyone who's looking into the Russia thing, he's fired. So I don't think he's really looking at their performance.
Well, the proof of the pudding will be how assiduously the FBI pursues that investigation into...
Yeah, and he'll probably hire Ivanka to run the FBI now.
Oh, yeah. Hey, did you know that James Comey is 6'8" tall?
Is he that tall?
I bet that's how he got his job.
What, because he was the tallest in the class?
Yeah, I think that's a whole thing, isn't it?
Oh, Rayburn.
Don't get me started.
No.
And
Sorry,
for your
Rayburn.
information, I am sitting right now, yes.
We said yesterday that Coatesville is now Auckland's wealthiest suburb with the average sale price somewhere about $3.3 million. Rayburn, you may enjoy this. Jim, the prices here in leafy Coatesville are skewed by the relentless march of faux French chateaux. The rest of us just live normally and listen to the strangled cries of possums and pukeko as they are decapitated by Porsche Cayennes full of chandeliers being rushed to the next developer. Do you hanker to live in the country, either of you with 6 acres and a ride-on lawnmower?
Sounds like a lot of effort. I mean, I'm not really into the mowing. I don't know how much fun that would be.
You could have staff.
Right. I'm not sure how much fun it would be to watch them mow.
No.
Yes.
No.
Would you...
No, I don't want to live in the country. I live quite close to the centre of Christchurch and I quite like living there. And, and people who want to go and live in the country should.
It's a bit of a New Zealand... It's one of the New Zealand fantasies, though, isn't it? Along with the nice beach house within 2 hours' drive of where you live, etc. I mean, it is something that we all yearn for somewhere deep inside, a version of. Not all, but I mean a lot of people.
Maybe the quarter acre, not necessarily 6, and crops and sheep. That might be more the image you get from Country Calendar.
Yes, and all that driving to get places.
And your mower doesn't go that fast,
No, that's true. Someone's talking about the days when we were at Otago Boys High School allowed to leave to go to Flo's tuck shop over the road. That's right. Thank you for reminding me. Rayburn Can, thank you for coming on the panel today.
My pleasure.
All the best with Positive Pessimist.
Thanks, Jim.
And Jenny Morton, always a pleasure to have you on too, Jenny, and come back.
Thank you, I will.
We'll certainly invite you. Thanks, everybody. That's us for another day. And Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, the Ministry of Social Development has apologised to emergency housing groups for trying to gag them from speaking with the media. The Associate Minister of Health, Nikki Wagner, has suggested liquor stores might be the best place to safely sell cigarettes, not dairy. So many robberies. A Dunedin lawyer urges people who fell ill with Campylobacter after the Havelock North water contamination crisis to make an ACC claim. New houses in South Dunedin will have to be built up to a metre higher because of the area's 2015 flood. Plus, 2 weeks out from the start of the America's Cup, we speak with Dean Parker, who's head of Team Japan, and we are inside the country's biggest classroom. Checkpoint coming up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Bat in aho. The Ministry of Social Development has apologised to emergency housing groups for trying to gag them from speaking to the media. Checkpoint has discovered an email that was sent to 10 agencies contracted to the ministry telling them it was critical they advised officials if contacted by the media. After Checkpoint tried to find out more, the ministry released a statement saying the emails was a mistake and each provider had received an apology. You can hear more on this shortly in the program. A tourism leader says a new infrastructure fund to help councils pay for more toilets and car parks falls far short of what is needed. The Tourism Minister, Paula Bennett, has announced a new $102 million tourism infrastructure fund, alongside $76 million in new funding for the Department of Conservation. Sharon Brett-Kelly reports.
Addressing an industry conference today, Mrs Bennett ruled out firmly a tourism tax, but she said $60 million of the fund is new money to be spent over the next 4 years. Councils will be able to apply for help for toilets, car parks, eyesights and sewerage, but they will also be expected to contribute. Tourism operators welcome the extra money, but they are not sure it will be enough, and they say some small councils will find it difficult to ask ratepayers to pitch in. Tourism industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the figure is well below the $100 million a year his group estimates is needed. This is Sharon Brett-Kelly.
The Associate Health Minister says dairy owners should stop selling cigarettes if they feel too threatened by robbers. The cost of a packet of 20 cigarettes will cost about $32 by 2020 after the last of 4 legislated 10% year-on-year price rises. Dairy owners say the price hikes are making cigarettes more and more enticing for thieves to sell on the black market, something Nikki Wagner acknowledges. She says one solution could be only allowing cigarettes to be sold in R18 locations like liquor stores. The government's plan to clean up waterways is weaker than the standards it's set to replace, an official report says. The report by NIWA confirms that the Clean Water Package, released in February, has a less stringent minimum for swimmable rivers than the 2014 National Policy Statement that it's set to replace. A Massey University freshwater ecologist, Mike Joy, says the report confirms what he and numerous scientists have been saying all along.
That the new standards are weaker than the old standards, and it was just a little bit of trickery on the part of the minister to try and convince people that it was being tougher when it was actually weakening limits.
Freshwater ecologist Mike Joy. The police have arrested a man in connection with 2 fires among a recent spate at Piha in West Auckland. The 19-year-old, who's from Piha, was arrested in Tauranga this morning. He'll face 3 arson charges and 1 burglary charge related to a fire at the local fish and chip shop and a large scrub fire next to the store. The police have apologised to a woman for acting too slowly after she called emergency services twice for help before being stabbed by her mentally ill son. An inquiry by the Independent Police Conduct Authority found the woman should have responded to the woman's first call for help. Superintendent Dave Trappett says police underestimated the situation and should have responded with more urgency. New houses in South Dunedin will have to be built up to 1 metre higher because of the area's 2015 flood. The Dunedin City Council has announced the floors of all new homes built in flood-prone areas must be at least 40 centimetres higher than where the floodwaters reached. The new measures are expected to affect about a dozen properties a year. 1,250 properties were damaged in South Dunedin, Kaikarai Valley and the Taieri Plain by the flooding in June 2015. The government is worried forecast gales and heavy rain may spread myrtle rust. About 100 people are working in and around Northland since the yellow fungus which can kill Pohutakawa, Rata and Fijoa were found at a Kerikeri nursery last week. The Minister for Primary Industries, Nathan Guy, says myrtle rust is very hard to eradicate. He says that given the disease is likely to have blown to New Zealand from Australia, it's expected that bad weather may spread myrtle rust further. It's 5:04. To sport, and the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says world number 2 England are one of, but not the only threat to their World Championship crown. The All Blacks have been drawn in Pool B alongside South Africa, Italy and 2 teams yet to qualify for the 2019 World Cup in Japan, while England are in the pool of death with France and Argentina. If both sides top their groups and win their quarterfinals, the All Blacks and England will set up a blockbuster semi-final clash. However, Hansen says England aren't the only team capable of knocking the All Blacks off their perch.
South Africa, Australia, France, I think are an improving side. Like, by the time the World Cup comes around, any one of a number of teams could win the tournament. England are going to be a force. They're getting better and better all the time, but they're in a really strong pool with France, who, as I said, are improving, and Argentina are always strong at World Cup time.
The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen. Meanwhile, the All Blacks captain Kieran Reid is likely to miss the test against Samoa at Eden Park next month as he recovers from thumb surgery. Reid fractured his thumb playing in the Crusaders match against the Cheetahs in South Africa last month. He says he's been told he can't use his thumb until the week before the Samoa test, but he's not willing to risk further injury ahead of the Lions tour. And Oracle Team USA have capsized again during a practice session ahead of the America's Cup in Bermuda. No one was injured. It's the second time the cup holders have capsized in the build-up to this year's event. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Christine Burns looks back on 40 years of campaigning for the rights of transgender people. This week's cultural ambassador, James Brown, celebrates the poetry of Carol Ann Duffy. Alison Balance explores the science of comedy during our changing world, or maybe the comedy of science, and Steve Bronius goes on a road trip through Mount Maunganui in tonight's letter to his mum on Nights of me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and there are warnings and watches in force for the North Island. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Periods of rain with localised downpours spreading from the west today. Thunderstorms and gales from Northland to Bay of Plenty tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered rain becoming widespread tomorrow with localised downpours, especially about the ranges. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, rain with heavy falls easing to scattered showers tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast, occasional rain clearing this evening, fine tomorrow. Canterbury and the Kaikoura coast, cloudy periods and a few showers. Bulla and Westland, rain with possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers this afternoon and becoming fine tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine spells and a few showers. Don't look at me.
Great
in Chatham
earrings.
Islands,
Great earrings.
rain developing tonight, heavy for a time tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Great earrings, Katrina Batten. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the program. Lovely to have you with us. Coming up, the serious business of cigarette robberies at $25 a packet. Dairy after dairy is being hit, sometimes violently. What can be done to keep their owners safe? Or should dairies stop selling cigarettes? Full stop. ACC in last year's Campylobacter outbreak in Havelock North. And Donald Trump, not as seen by a critic or an opponent, but by a man who's occupied the very top levels of the Republican establishment. That is a fascinating interview. But we begin tonight with an email. It was received last night by emergency housing providers, and it was sent from the Ministry of Social Development. It told them they cannot talk to media without talking to the ministry first. The email had the subject media protocol. It was sent by a regional contracts manager instructing providers they must talk to their regional contracts managers if they're aware of an issue relating to emergency housing, which is, and I quote, likely to appear in the media. Now, the email stated, you will be aware that emergency housing has been a key area of interest in the media recently and is likely to continue to be into the future. Understandably, it is critical that the ministry is advised of any media coverage that arises, and we need your support to do so. If you receive any contact from the media, you should explain that you will need to consult with the ministry prior to any response being given. All requests received by your organisation for media interviews or for information must be immediately referred to your regional contracts manager. Our producer, Michelle Cook, spoke to providers about this directive, but we've altered their voices because at that point they'd been told they couldn't talk to us without first talking to the ministry.
Personally, I felt that it was quite an intimidating sort of letter. I also think that it smacks of political interference that MSD have been directed by the Minister to shut us down. The letter becomes intimidating because we don't know what might happen. So it's not in good faith. The government has had a real focus in the last 12 to 18 months on collaboration, and this just undoes it all. We should have every right to speak on behalf of our homeless families and those living in poverty.
Clearly, it embarrasses the government every time homeless stories or the graphic details of families falling through gaps appears in the media. It's worrying that we only ever speak the truth, and we are often a voice for those people who are unable to speak up or be heard themselves. They are the people who would be left out in the cold, middle of winter, nowhere to go, all because we spoke up for positive change within our community. So therefore we have to query, why are we being silent?
We asked the Ministry for an interview on this, and a couple of hours later the providers we spoke to received a call telling them it had all been a mistake. The Ministry declined an interview but said it was aware of an unapproved email. We also asked to talk to the Minister, Anne Tolley, but her office told us it was an operational issue for the Ministry, so we went back to the Ministry again saying, hold on, you need to talk about this, and they declined again. The Ministry did provide us with a statement from its Regional Commissioner, Eru Linden, saying 10 providers had been sent that email. Each provider had been contacted, received an apology and told the email does not represent the Ministry's position. The statement said a well-meaning staff member sent the email in good faith but did not check with others before doing so. Staff and the contracts team were told that, like every New Zealander, Ministry of Social Development providers have the right to speak with the media. The Ministry said it's considering if there will be any repercussions for the manager who sent the email. If you received the email or anything like it, we would like to hear from you. It's coming up to 12 minutes past 5. On Tuesday, we spoke to dairy and liquor store owners who say armed robberies are becoming so frequent they no longer feel safe at work, even during the day. Our reporter Zach Fleming visited a dairy in Mangere whose owner was selling out because of crime. Half an hour after Zach left the store, it was robbed again. Since then, we've surveyed dairies who've been the victims of aggravated robberies, and they've told us it's cigarettes that are targeted. With a retail price of over $20 a packet, there's a growing black market in stolen cigarettes. They're easy to sell. It's almost impossible to prove they're stolen. And as the footage we've been given reveals, the people stealing them work very fast and sometimes brutally too. Here's Zach Fleming again.
Dairy workers fight to protect their living, brawling with robbers. At 9:30 in the morning on January the 11th, 3 men walk into the McKinstry Avenue Superette in Mangere, armed with hammers.
They just say me like, open the tills and give me the cash.
It's all captured on CCTV. The shop workers scatter and the robbers yelling beeline for the cigarette cabinet.
We are just worried about the stuff in the office, the laptops or some important papers as well.
Right. So as soon as they tried to go into the office, you thought we need to do something?
Yeah. Because if we don't do something, they'll hit us. Yeah.
Kamal Preet Singh, the shop's manager. He grabs 2 pieces of wood and comes out swinging, landing blow after blow to one of the robbers' head and body. One of the other workers runs in with his own piece of wood from one of the aisles. The CCTV is alarming. One of the robbers Kamal is hitting charges at him, swinging a hammer. The other 2 robbers run.
They got the rod and this guy. I was holding this guy and he got the hammer, or you can see in his hands.
When they realise their friend is still inside, they come back. They're hesitant to use their hammers though, instead throwing anything they can grab, food, drinks, a rubbish bin.
And they were high on drugs, seemed like.
The man violently swings a hammer at Kamal and they struggle for nearly a minute. Then his 2 friends give up and they run. It's now been around 2 minutes since they first entered demanding cash, and as Kamal still struggles with the robber left behind, an employee manages to shut the roller door, trapping him inside.
They got nothing.
Really?
Yeah.
So the cigarettes were locked?
Yeah, no, not locked. They just dropped everything over there, but they only got the other stuff, the chocolates.
Kamal says the police came quickly, within around 5 minutes, and arrested the man he trapped inside. A 17-year-old and an 18-year-old were charged with aggravated robbery and aggravated assault and are before the courts. Kamal's elbow was injured after being smashed by a hammer. He says it's mostly recovered now, but he doesn't feel safe anymore. And now the owner of the dairy is considering selling up.
It is dangerous now. It was not dangerous before. Yeah, it was like from past 5 to 6 months. Before I don't hear any robberies. Like I have heard only like once or twice, and in the past 5 or 6 months I've heard like 15, 20 robberies. Yeah, even more in Papatoe, Mount Roskill.
And Kamal, like lots of other shopkeepers Checkpoint's spoken to, put it down to one reason.
It's only because of the smoke's gone up every year. Government try to like smoke-free country, but people don't have money to spend on the smokes, and then they rob the smokes.
And it's not just violent thugs smashing up shops. A month ago yesterday, 5 organised men cleaned out the Avondale food market of tobacco in under 1 minute.
It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Owner Raj Patel is quietly reading the paper behind his till. He hears yelling and looks up.
So there must be somebody having a go with me. I mean, having me on like a Halloween or something, you know. Then I saw they pull out all the weapons, and I thought, nah, this is serious. One of the big guys, he chased me.
All 5 clearly have their own job. The big guy Raj is talking about punched him and took him aside. 2 jump the counter and grab loose tobacco, passing it over the counter to 2 runners, who were going back and forth between their stolen getaway car outside.
Probably they took about $6,000-7,000 of tobacco, maybe.
$7,000 worth in one go. It's organised crime because you can now make decent money on selling stolen cigarettes thanks to the 10% year-on-year price rises. Sunny Kushal, founder of the Crime Prevention Group, says the government is partly responsible for the expansion of the tobacco black market.
Cigarette is definitely one of the attractions because, if you look at the value, and these offenders, when they are picking up all those boxes of cigarettes, they are not going to consume themselves. It's going to the black market. And then that's where the whole cycle is starting.
And it's obviously not just Auckland. Cigarettes cost the same across the entire country. On Sunday in Greerton and Tauranga, 2 men, again armed with hammers, are captured on CCTV gunning for the Carlisle Dairy's cigarette cabinet at 2 in the afternoon. Owner Amandeep Kaur says robberies and shopliftings ramped up recently. I asked her what they usually go for.
Mostly the smokes, yeah. Smokes and whatever, the till, that's all. Smokes and till.
Why do you think they're targeting the smokes?
That's the, expensive stuff in the shop. Yeah.
The Associate Health Minister, Nikki Wagner, acknowledges the more expensive cigarettes become, the more enticing they become to thieves.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should sell them with alcohol, because you know that the security systems on an alcohol convenience store is usually much higher than a dairy. There is a difference between the two. Maybe they should go there.
The government's committed to 10% year-on-year price rises until the year 2020. In 2020, the price of the cheapest 20-pack will be around $32, which will make cigarettes even more attractive to criminals than they are now. So what does Minister Wagner, who's in charge of those price rises, have to say?
Certainly I have a sympathy for dairy owners, and I say talk to your local police, talk to your neighbourhood, watch out for suspicious people around your area, and make sure that your security measures match the risk.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And we'll hear more from Associate Health Minister Nikki Wagner after 6 o'clock tonight. ACC is being urged to be proactive and settle claims up front from people made sick from last year's Campylobacter outbreak in Havelock North. A Dunedin lawyer, Warren Foster, says an inquiry into the outbreak proves the Hastings District Council admitted culpability, and because of that, anyone who fell ill qualifies for coverage. Emile Donovan has been looking at this.
When Havelock North resident Lucy Dobbs and her husband and son got sick in August last year, she didn't imagine she'd be dealing with the consequences nearly 9 months later. She was wrong.
He's had a significant amount of time off school, and I suppose what we're dealing with now is just an ongoing irritable bowel. We're just in the process of going to the hospital to be referred to a paediatrician, because it's sort of got to a point where no one really knows, where to go with this.
Mrs. Dobbs has been in and out of the doctors and lost thousands in income from time off running her business. Normally, people can't claim ACC for illnesses caused by drinking contaminated water, but Dunedin barrister and researcher Warren Foster says people in Havelock North can, because the contamination was due to criminal negligence. In December last year, the Hastings District Council accepted responsibility for not maintaining its bores properly under the Resource Management Act and paid a fine. Mr Forster says that's an admission of guilt, which means anyone who contracted campylobacteriosis qualifies for cover.
People in Havelock North who've contracted campylobacteriosis can contact ACC and say, are we going to be covered? That's really a pretty simple question, but as I said, rather than determine it 10,000 times, it would be much better for ACC to take the lead, look at it, make a decision, and let the people of Havelock North know.
He's calling on ACC to act now and reassure those who fell sick that it will pay up.
ACC has an opportunity here to show some leadership and to show New Zealanders that it actually is going to take a role in managing New Zealand's personal injury system and take a proactive role, and it would be great to see ACC stepping up to the mark there.
Lucy Dobbs says that'd be lovely, but she's not sure how realistic it is.
But can ACC afford that? Would that ever happen? If it was easy and ACC said that, yes, that'd be great. But, it's like the council have offered remuneration for business owners, $200. It's like, what's the point,
In a statement, ACC says it will consider any claims put forward, but the agency warns that, at this stage, it's unlikely to pay up.
Based on current information, they would most likely be declined because the ingestion of bacteria is not considered an accident unless it is the result of a criminal act.
ACC refused to answer any specific questions about the Havelock North contamination and whether it was due to criminal negligence. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Emile Donovan aho.
Obviously, we'll keep an eye on this story. The government's plan to clean up waterways is weaker than the standards it's set to replace, according to an official report released today. The Environment Minister, Nick Smith, says under previous standards there was not a focus on swimmability, so the government is trying to get it right. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
When the government's Clean Water Plan was announced in February, it was widely criticised. The NIWA report released today confirms that the Clean Water Package has a weaker standard for swimmable waters than the 2014 National Policy Statement that it's set to replace. One of the report's authors is Graham McBride.
No question about that. In terms of comparing it with the National Policy Statement of 2014 and what we've got now, the national bottom line, as it was called, is a bit lower than what the proposal in the swimmability.
But Mr McBride says that comes with the proviso that the median is restricted to less than 130 E. coli per 100 millilitres, and that's the point at which the health risk ceased to exist. However, the Environment Minister, Nick Smith, doesn't agree that the standards are weaker.
Because the old National Policy Statement said the only thing that regional councils were required to do was to have a weightable standard, and that provided for E. coli of 1,000 per 100 mils. Actually, the swimmable standard requires a minimum mean of 130, and obviously 130 is a whole lot tighter than 1,000.
Massey University freshwater ecologist Mike Joy says the report confirms what he and numerous scientists have said all along.
That the new standards are weaker than the old standards, and it was just a little bit of trickery on the part of the minister to try and convince people that it was being tougher when it was actually weakening limits.
A table in the NIWA report shows that 30% of freshwater sites would be considered swimmable under the 2014 standard, but 43% would be under the new Clean Water Standard. Asked whether that proved the goalposts had simply been moved, Nick Smith said they had not.
No, because the old standard had a bottom line of weightability. That is a very polluted level, and in fact the report says that 97% of those monitored sites would have passed that. What the report points out is that, and NIWA has said, is that moving that standard from weightable to swimmable actually means that only 43% would meet the requirements of the NPS. In anybody's terms, that is a substantive toughening of our freshwater standards.
Mike Joy says the goalposts have most definitely changed.
The core of this is that they went from 260 E. coli units per litre up to 1,000 and called it weightable. And then when they got called out on, New Zealanders saying, well, we don't want weightable, we want swimmable, they just went back and attached the word swimmable to 540, which was halfway between the two. So then, you could do this little sleight of hand and say, we gave in, we've given you swimmable. But actually they haven't.
The cleaner water standards have now been reopened for submissions for another 2 weeks. Ata witi whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
5:24. New houses in South Dunedin will have to be built up to 1 metre high because of the area's 2015 flood. The Dunedin City Council has announced the floors of all new homes built in flood-prone areas must be at least 40 centimetres higher than where the floodwaters reached. 1,250 properties were damaged in South Dunedin, Kaikorai Valley and the Tairi Plain by the flooding in June 2015. The Council's General Manager of Community Services, Simon Pickford, told our reporter Ian Telfer the change takes effect from today and includes all residential buildings, including rest homes, kindergartens and schools.
We've been analysing data recently from the 2015 flood. There has been more information coming forward recently that's basically allowed us to say there's some good stuff here that we can then provide to our customers when they ask that question, how high should I build? So now we have that information. There's publicly available information from the Regional Council as well. So this provides us with a more complete data set. But it's not complete, so it does mean that over time we'll be able to build a more comprehensive picture.
But it could be quite a big jump. For some people it could be 1 metre on their property, yeah?
Potentially in those extreme cases, but I think those will be the most extreme cases. Most of these affected properties will be 500 millimetres above the ground for those which weren't affected by the flood, and for those which had a flood, and we're adding on a 400 millimetre addition to that. That shouldn't be too much in terms of cost to add into the build. When you look at the overall cost of a new build, it shouldn't be a significant factor, we're hoping. But obviously there will be outliers, but that's unfortunately the way that it's just falling. We have that data, we can't ignore it.
Do you know how many houses this will affect?
At this stage, we don't have a figure. We know that about 12 new builds are made in, say, South Dunedin, and per year. So it's not a huge number. But we recognise across the whole city there will be a number of affected developments. But we're not anticipating huge numbers will be affected. But we're recognising that those costs, any cost in addition to a new build, is going to be of interest to people. So that's why we're raising this now.
Simon Pickford from the Dunedin City Council talking to our reporter Ian Telfer. The government will spend $178 million over the next 4 years to help councils and the Department of Conservation DOC build more car parks and toilets to cope with record tourist numbers. The Tourism Minister, Paula Bennett, has announced a new $102 million tourism infrastructure fund, alongside $76 million in new funding for the Department of Conservation. But of that $100 million, only $60 million is new money, and as Sharon Brett-Kelly reports, it falls short of what tourism operators say is needed.
Paula Bennett says the extra $60 million will make a huge difference to councils unable to pay for more tourist facilities.
All up, that spend that will be spent on facilities, really getting into those more challenging and hot spots that we know have been feeling pressure, is a significant spend.
Councils will be able to apply for money for toilets, car parks and information sites, but ratepayers will also have to pay. And Ms Bennett says private investors could also get involved, which will take the total value of the fund to $250 million.
I think Queenstown's kind of ripe for it. What are some of the other ideas of how you get from the airport and into the town centre? And I could see something like that really being a PPP between private interests, the government actually having some sort of input and council as well.
Tourism industry Aotearoa says the announcement is recognition of the problem, but its chief executive Chris Roberts says it is well below what's needed.
Almost 18 months ago we came out and said that we need a fund of $100 million a year. And we've done a lot of work since then, and that work has really just reinforced that we think the problem is still of that level. So we're still some way from that with this announcement. So it's now up to local government to put forward the projects.
Operators at the tourism conference Trends welcome the extra funding, but some say their small councils will struggle to contribute.
The upsurge in growth over the last couple of years, it's the regions that need support, and in many cases the locals would not support a higher rate take because they perceive that it's it's not their issue.
A lot of the local people get a bit frustrated when people start, it's not abusing, but there's no facilities and they start walking into their shops asking for toilets and things like that. So I think any public facilities that's going to take the weight off your local New Zealander can only benefit everyone.
We operate on the Forgotten World Highway. We'd love to see that state highway become fully sealed. There's a 12-kilometre section still to do and prevents a lot of tourists from driving that particular route.
Meanwhile, Paula Bennett says a tourist tax is not on the cards at this stage.
We are in this wonderful situation of being in surplus. The government's committed to actually working with our tourism industry, and this fund, I think, will cover that.
However, at the same press conference, the Conservation Minister Maggie Barry announced some of the $76 million allocated to DOC will be spent on a new booking system, which will introduce a higher charge on overseas tourists.
I think there is much more of an appetite than we might acknowledge for international visitors who are used to paying for walks, used to paying for access to things, to pay a little bit more, and for New Zealanders who pay rates and taxes to get a discount on that.
Maggie Barry says the rates have not been decided, but they are likely to be introduced next April. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ko Sharon Brett Kelly aho.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program, Dean Barker on his preparations for the America's Cup. Of course, he's head of Team Japan. We're inside New Zealand's biggest open learning environment, a classroom for 500 students. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. We'd love to know if you think dairies should continue to sell cigarettes. We're also on Twitter, of course, Facebook, where you can watch us. And our email is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Thank you for being with us. Time for the headlines with Katrina Batten.
The Ministry of Social Development has apologised to emergency housing groups for trying to gag them from speaking to the media. An email was sent to 10 agencies contracted to the ministry, telling them it was critical they advised officials if contacted by the media. After Checkpoint tried to find out more, the ministry released a statement saying the email was a mistake and each provider had received an apology. A tourism leader says a new infrastructure fund to help councils pay for more toilets and car parks falls far short of what is needed. The Tourism Minister, Paula Bennett, has announced a new $102 million tourism infrastructure fund alongside $76 million in new funding for the Department of Conservation. The Associate Health Minister says dairy owners should stop selling cigarettes if they feel too threatened by robbers. The cost of a packet of 20 cigarettes will cost about $32 by 2020. Dairy owners say price hikes are making cigarettes more and more enticing for thieves to sell on the black market, something Nikki Wagner acknowledges. She says one solution could be only allowing cigarettes to be sold in R18 locations such as liquor stores. A government plan to clean up waterways is weaker than the standards it's set to replace, an official report has said. The report by NIWA confirms that the clean water package released in February has a less stringent minimum for swimmable rivers than the 2014 national policy statement that it's set to replace. A Massey University freshwater ecologist Mike Joy says the report confirms what he and other scientists have been saying all along. The police have arrested a 19-year-old man in connection with two fires among a recent spate in Piha in West Auckland. He'll face 3 arson charges and 1 burglary charge related to a fire at the local fish and chip shop and a large scrub fire next to the store. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Jonathan Mitchell joining us live from Wellington. Jono, last night you were looking forward to Graham Wheeler, the Reserve Bank Governor, and his announcement today. You said the figures wouldn't change. They didn't. You said there was interest in his language. What was his language?
Evening, John. Yes, well, he left the official cash rate, as you say, at 1.75%. That wasn't the surprise. The surprise today was that he kept his neutral stance. The market was expecting the fact that inflation got back to the middle of the target band, 2%. There's been a recent rise in dairy prices. And a steady stream recently of economic numbers would lead the Reserve Bank to be a bit more hawkish, have that tightening bias. But there was none of that today. They stuck to the previous script of being quite neutral. Rates are still firmly on hold until late 2019. They've talked about risks overseas as well as here in New Zealand. And the Governor, Graham Wheeler, is also still a bit sceptical about inflation. Here's what he had to say a bit earlier today.
We're not seeing the build-up in inflation pressures that some other commentators are seeing, which is not to say that it won't eventuate. We do expect inflation to move back towards 2% in terms of headline inflation. But that's the main reason why we've kept the neutral stance. We just don't see the need to change that stance at this point. You know, for the foreseeable future, we would expect the OCR to remain at its current level.
For the foreseeable future, it's fascinating, isn't it? So that was Graham Wheeler speaking earlier today. What was the reaction to the monetary policy statement, Jono?
There was some immediate reaction on the markets, John. The Kiwi fell against its US counterpart. Economists in their notes that came out this morning and this afternoon, some were surprised. One word I saw an economist was a bit perplexed that there wasn't any word about a tightening bias and the fact that they haven't brought forward their interest rate projections. And the chief economist at Kiwi Bank, Zoe Wallace, says the Reserve Bank and Graham Wheeler just being very cautious.
We thought that they'd probably shift their OCR track forecast forward by about 6 months and maintain a very gradual OCR profile. In the end, they didn't even budge, so that was a bit of a surprise for us. And particularly the tone of the statement was maintained as much more neutral, so very much unchanged since the February monetary policy statement. Still a lot of concerns about the lack of underlying inflation pressure coming through in the economy. And basically still that story about they've got plenty of time to sit on their hands and wait and see how this whole thing develops over the next year or so.
So, John, the Reserve Bank has time on its hands. It will be watching those inflation numbers very closely.
Yeah, fascinating day. What did the markets end up doing in the end?
The top 50 index gained 66 points to end at 7,490. And the Kiwi is still lower, like this morning, down to 68.3 US cents and 93 Australian. John.
Jonathan Mitchell, doing business from Wellington. Thanks, Jono. Last night on Checkpoint we spent, well, probably the best part of half an hour looking at the sacking of James Comey, and what we realised again is that Donald Trump polarises people like few politicians in recent history, viscerally, stridently, absolutely. But polarities require two sides, and the chances are, unless you watch Fox TV, you don't hear terribly much from the pro-Trump side. So we sought out Republican royalty, and we found it in the form of David Keane, a campaign advisor for Ronald Reagan and for George Bush Sr. He's also a former president of the NRA. He is as Republican as it gets. He voted for Trump, he doesn't regret it, and he would do so again.
In many ways, President Trump has turned out to be better in a policy sense than many of those of us who voted for him thought he might be. Much of the Trump vote was a reaction to the candidacy of Mrs. Clinton and was an attempt to keep her from getting to the White House. Mr. Trump wasn't my first choice for president. He wasn't the first choice of many Republicans. And there has been a debate that's ongoing as to whether or not he's a conservative or what is he. What he is the first non-political president we've had in a long time. He's learning, but from a substantive standpoint, not only are conservatives and most Republicans very pleased with what he's done on the Supreme Court, but with the general policy positions he's taken, the people he's put into the cabinet, and the like. So in some ways, we're much more impressed with what we got than we thought we were going to be.
It's fascinating to hear you talk with admiration. That's not me paraphrasing you incorrectly, is it? You feel a degree of admiration towards what Donald Trump has achieved so far in his presidency, and it is exceeding your expectations. Do you think he's fulfilling the kind of more populist end of his promises?
Well, the recent polls taken at the end of the 100th day, for example, show that there was one poll that showed that of the people who voted for Mr. Trump in November, only 2% said that they would vote differently today, and that in fact he would beat Mrs. Clinton today by a wider margin than he did before. So, and that, all of that does not indicate that he's wildly popular. What it indicates is that we have a fairly evenly divided country, much more evenly divided and much more deeply divided than in previous decades. So the people that voted for him, and I think that it was more than just against Mrs. Clinton personally. There had been brewing, particularly in what the elites like to call flyover country, the Wisconsins, the Iowas, the Minnesotas, in the center of the country. There had been brewing for perhaps a decade, a feeling among people that they'd been left out, and not only left out, but that they were being dismissed as irrelevant by the people in Washington and on the coasts. And I think if that had not bubbled up this time, it would have bubbled up in 4 more years with another candidate, but it was going to happen. For example, Mrs. Clinton was roundly criticized after the election because one of the key states she lost was Wisconsin.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it was pointed out that she'd never visited Wisconsin.
So
she didn't have to, she didn't think, because those states were what they were. And I would be willing to bet, and when I talk about the elites, that if you look back over 2 years before, she and Mr. Obama visited those states, but where did they go? They went to university campuses. You can go to university campuses in Wisconsin, in Iowa, in Ohio, in Michigan, and never actually visit the state because you're visiting an extension of the same culture that you have in Washington, D.C. and New York.
So you use the word elite in a really pejorative term. You were being derisory because you are talking about people who are out of touch, who are disconnected, who have absolutely no comprehension of life on the ground. Now, for you as a Republican, they're Democrats. And yet, aren't you the elite? I mean, you've worked with Reagan, you've worked with George...
The elite attitude exists in both parties.
Okay.
It's not a partisan kind of thing.
But
it's a question of whether you're in touch and whether you appreciate and understand the feelings of average Americans. I traveled through Wisconsin late in the campaign in 2016, and I remember driving through one town, and it should have been a clue. I should have been able to predict the Trump victory after doing this, but I didn't. I drove through this town, small town, and on both sides of the street, on every lawn, was a sign that said "Proudly Deplorable." When Mrs. Clinton called half the people of the country deplorable, they sort of looked at each other and said, if that's the way she feels, we know exactly what we have to do. There's a county in Kentucky that for 99 years had never countywide gone for any Democrat for any office. It was once featured on 60 Minutes as the most reliably Democratic county in the country. At the time of the election, the registration was 9-1 Democrat, and Mr. Trump took it by 75%. And what had happened was all of those people had decided that they'd had enough.
Enough of what? What? So let's set aside...
Enough not only of policies that they thought hurt them, but of the disdain of the people making those policies for them, their lifestyles, their values, and their economic future. And it's really the disdain that bound them together. So Mr. Trump exploited that politically, as one who was really looking at it should, and he benefited from it. Now the question he faces is whether or not the sort of symbolic rejection of what they've done will result in policies that will in fact help those people. And the question of whether that's going to happen is yet to be answered and won't be answered for some time.
Do you think he will help those people? Because if we look at the faith they have in him, and if you describe that part of Kentucky, which has been Democrat for as long as people have been voting in the United States, and it wanted Donald Trump as their president.
Mm-hmm.
Is he going to help them? I think because forgive me, because you are stopping me in my tracks hearing this perspective. Here, it's fascinating. And it's absolutely fascinating. But what I also see is a man who is And you stop me if I'm becoming rude, but he looks solipsistic in his self-obsession. He looks irrational and petulant on social media. He's always at those bloody golf courses. Now, those golf courses, membership of those golf courses is as remote and aloof from the lives you are describing as anything is possible to be on this planet. So how is he really their man?
You know, my father spent his life as a labor union organizer and made me promise never to play golf because that's something that workers didn't play. Now, of course, it's mostly workers who play golf. That was an early era. And Mr. Obama and other presidents do the same. The real problem is whether or not the Republicans, and this includes Mr. Trump, whether the Republicans are finally going to address some of the problems these people face. The problems are this. If you take the Midwest, which has been gutted by trade policies and the rest, trade policies which incidentally in a macro sense has helped everybody. If there's a policy that will provide real training to real people to do real jobs, both parties ought to be looking at that. Both parties ought to be doing it. If the Republicans do it, they will change the votes of those who were simply rejecting the Democrats in favor of Donald Trump into actual Republican votes in the future. But as I say, the jury is out on that one. Conceptually, it's simple. In fact, it may be very difficult.
It's David Keane, a former Republican presidential advisor, talking to us earlier today. We turn now to sport, and to do so we're going to Bermuda, where the America's Cup Challenger Series is just over a fortnight away. The winner challenges Oracle, of course, for the Cup. Emirates Team New Zealand are there, highly fancied. The Swedes are back with Artemis. France and Britain are there. And so too is Japan. SoftBank Team Japan, whose skipper and CEO are the same man, New Zealander Dean Barker. Barker has built this team from the ground, basically, in the 2 years since he parted company with Team New Zealand. They're outsiders, yes, but in practice racing, they've beaten both Oracle and Team New Zealand.
It's been a really good opportunity for all the teams to check in, just to see where they're at. There's always sort of that, the thing where you're not sure how much everyone's really sort of showing at the stage. All the teams at various stages can be competitive, and if you're on the pace in terms of speed, then it really does come down to how well you sail the boat around the course. And we've seen a lot of close racing. I think at different times, different teams have probably been sailing better than others. And now, here we are 17 days out. We've got one more practice race series next week. Then we're into it. So it's coming around bloody fast.
Yes, speaking of bloody fast, you are, aren't you? All the boats are. What sort of top speeds are you doing, Dean?
The boats are really, they're really cool. They're always ripping around in very little wind. At times we're sort of sailing along, sort of doing 4 times wind speed, which is quite a cool thing. But the top speeds, I don't know of anyone sort of hitting 50 yet, which is sort of, I guess, that the mythical barrier everyone likes to get to. But we often are seeing mid 40s, and you definitely know you're going fast when you're doing that.
Mid 40s, and if you're doing mid 40s, what's the wind speed?
You don't need a huge amount of wind to do that. Like we can easily hit mid 40s and sort of 13, 14 knots of wind.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And some of the manoeuvres, it's quite incredible. Like the boats are super powerful, and they generate a lot of power, and they're very, very efficient.
Yeah, very efficient, but you want more efficiency, right, and more speed. But the question is, with 17 days to go, how much do you tinker at this stage? Is there a risk of overdoing it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always that sort of difficult period where you're looking at what gains are left on the table, and you're trying to decide, the risk-reward equation, and whether or not you are brave enough to sort of try and take some more gains, which you think are on the table. But with every change you make, there's quite often an unintended consequence which you have to deal with, and you've got to be very careful with the way you do that. Reliability is still going to be a very important part of the racing, given that you've got a double round robin to kick things off, and then then one of the teams leaves. So it's pretty cutthroat. And the races, we race basically race a day for the first sort of 10 days, and then once you're through that sort of part of it, it's into semis and finals. And obviously the winner of that goes on to race Oracle for the match. But yeah, it's obviously going to be very, very important. They're quick fire races. The duration's sort of down to 20 minutes, and in some days, particularly, if you get into the knockout stages, you can easily be doing 2 to 3 races a day. So any issues that you have are going to be a big problem.
Boy, 20 minutes is a quick race. Tell me about the start and the first mark. Have the people who've got the front at the first mark got the race? Is anyone winning from behind?
The start and first mark are very powerful. So if you can be leading at Mark 1, it certainly helps to set up the race. So you can choose really, I guess, the best route that you want to sail around the course. And then you're sort of really forcing the other boat to probably try and make something happen. So it is definitely an advantage to be in front at the early stages. But we have still seen a number of races where the lead has changed, often numerous times around the race course.
That's exciting.
So it's been great to be part of, and we really hope that we can put together a good showing when racing kicks off.
Dean Barker talking to us earlier. The production, everyone's sitting in the control room watching it, and Bridget said that's not a boat, it's a kite. And that's it, exactly. It barely even touches the water, going in those mid-40s. At Canterbury College has put a new spin on modern learning environments by getting rid of traditional classrooms and creating an open space the size of 27 teaching spaces. The new $15.5 million building, which includes science labs, lecture rooms, common areas, is being described as a learning area unlike anything else in New Zealand. So we sent our excellent reporter Conan Young to Rangiora High School to tread its heated floor, see some fancy gadgets and learn more about its collected curriculum.
Hi John, look, we're here with Deputy Principal of Rangiora High School, Brian Hayes. He's very kindly agreed to show us around this brand new facility they have here, a modern learning environment. So Brian, first of all, just tell us a little bit about this. Why have you moved to having 500 students all in one room effectively?
Well, it's the new type of pedagogy. My two colleagues in charge of teaching and learning and curriculum have transformed our curriculum into sort of co-curricular, and it's called the connected curriculum. So in here, the Year 9s are taught 5 subjects. They're taught health, science, maths, English, and the other one, social science, and all the teachers know what everybody's doing. So at once there's a group of 60 students in a teaching hub, and they're probably being taught social studies now, but they're being taught social studies by their social studies teacher and their maths teacher. And the next period they have maths, and they're probably being taught by the maths teacher and the English teacher. So the idea is that all of the 5 teachers teaching I shouldn't say, but the core type subjects to the students all know what they're all doing every day. So we're calling them the connected curriculum.
So why is that important?
Well, it's just a new way of delivering the curriculum so that the students feel supported. And also, I think that's the best idea, is that all the teachers know all the students in their hub of 58 or 60 students, and that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So the students can go to any person in their teaching team and say, please, can you help me with this or whatever, and that's kind of how it works. Yeah.
And so how many days into this brave new experiment are we?
Yesterday was opening day. All the students in the Year 9 came in here just on Monday, and so this is kind of like day 2.5. But already the students are coming up and talking to the acting principal and saying thank you very much, Miss Malcolm, for this, and the students are really responding. And also in this area here, we're standing here, which is basically where the Year 13s can come and study and have their lunch and that sort of thing. They sort of think, well, it's like an airport terminal. B, it's really adult, and they're just really loving it.
And so this is for your senior students, this area?
This area we're standing in now, yes, it is called the landing, and this is part of the area that the actual school funded itself. So the Ministry of Education funded the 27 equivalent teaching spaces, not classrooms these days, teaching spaces, and the Board of Trustees has funded this area for events, as you can see, and for Year 13s to relax and study in, and we've got a terrace here for presentations and that sort of thing, so you can,
When a lot of people hear, though, that you're squeezing 27 classrooms under one roof, I mean, a lot of people sort of would have their misgivings, wouldn't they?
They might do, but as you walk through, you'll see it's very spacious. There's a building management system which works automatically, so when the carbon dioxide builds up, the fans come on, the ventilation opens. When the northwest is coming, the windows open and close. Everything's done automatically, so it's all very, very high tech. There's no buttons that a teacher can push to, reduce the temperature, that sort of thing. It's all been done by computers, and it works pretty much automatically. It's going to take us 1 year to learn how to use the building properly, so we have to go through all 4 seasons. So we're simply going to set the building at one temperature with the underfloor heating and go for it.
Well, look, maybe can you show us around and let's have a look and see how this all works?
Yeah, we can.
All right, so what are we going to look at first?
Well, the first area here is part of the area here, which is called the terrace, etc. And I've just had a function here 20 minutes ago presenting blazers to 2 or 3 of our sports teams. But yesterday when we had the opening up on here, then obviously we can house, yesterday there was 80, 100 people in here, and the same sort of thing. So we can bring, when the University of Canterbury come, or somebody, or University of Otago coming, instead of having 60 or 70 students in the big hall, it being like a barn, they can come here, a screen drops down from here, they can do a PowerPoint presentation and that sort of thing. So, and for functions, as I said, we can have team functions. We've just had a team function here 20 minutes before you arrived. Yeah. Right.
Oh,
so,
fantastic.
that sort of thing, yeah.
All right, and so, what can you show us next?
Well, we're coming through, as we come through the building here, and as we walk through the river, the area designed on the carpet is Rakahuri. The building's called Rakahuri, which is our local river, the Ashley River. And as you go out, the carpet colour changes into the grass, and then as you go further up, there's polished concrete, which are kind of the mountains. So as we come up here, we've got 6 learning hubs, which each Year 9 house, our school is divided into 6 houses. So we're coming up here into a learning hub which holds about 58 or 60 students, and this is the Hillary House.
So this is behind this partition here.
Yes, so
it's all sort of split up, isn't it? You haven't just got one big mass area. You've got a lot of different areas going on.
So, for example, the students come here. There's two data projectors, linked up. They get, and it's also BYOD, so they bring their own device here, or they come in there with their laptops or Chromebooks or whatever they happen to be using. So it's all the Wi-Fi in action. So it's kind of pretty high tech, and over there you can see a little thing called a correct turn. That's the teacher's desk. So it's kind of a different sort of situation. The teacher comes in there, logs in on the computer, it all comes up on the data projector over here, and they don't have to carry bags around and books around and that sort of thing.
And I can see you've got a room here that's sort of split off.
These are breakout rooms. So yeah, these are breakout rooms. And they're all
come around the side so you can actually get in here.
Got a different design. So this breakout room here has got whiteboard desks in it, so students can come in here in a group, and you can see there's some work left on here. It says please leave, or some students already tried to hog the thing.
So you don't have to scribe your name into the desk anymore.
No, you don't. It's a whiteboard, and these flip up. So these actually tip up on their side, and so you can wheel them out here and show off. So if you're doing a project or you're doing something, and you can bring it out here, show the teacher and show the other group, and then wipe it off, and somebody else can do it. So
one of the sometimes criticisms you hear of these larger modern learning environments is around the noise. But is this a means of sort of cutting down on the noise, having these breakout rooms?
No ceiling in here. There's acoustic tiles. And the more people that are in here, the less noise apparently. So when it's full, we've already had 360 Year 9s, 160 senior students in here, and the noise is lower. When there's 2 classes in here, or only 1 class, then it's noisy. When there's 550 in here, all the walls here are acoustic panels. All this stuff here, the stuff on the back of these, cubby holes, this is all acoustic. So they're not pin boards; it's all acoustic walls, etc. So we are being encouraged not to pin too much on the walls, because the more solid stuff we have on the walls, the more the noise bounces around. But
so a lot of thought and work has gone into making this work.
Very high tech. It has. Yeah, the structural engineers and the acoustic engineers and those sort of people, and the interior design people, architects have thought of everything really. Yeah, almost everything. I think yes. Yeah, they have. Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. Colin Young at Rangiora High School. Amazing. Lots of feedback coming on cigarettes. Let's try and whistle through some. You can take over that, KB. Perhaps the government should supply security for dairies with cigarettes as they're making all the profit from the extra tax that is causing the problem, says Simon. ATM-type vending machines outside police stations to curb cigarette theft, says Lynette. Sell cigarettes at police stations. The profits can help pay for the police, and if there's a robbery, it's more likely the police will investigate. I'm no fan of cigarettes. However, as the law stands, it isn't against the law for a dairy to sell them, but it's most definitely a crime to steal them. So why should the proprietors be the ones punished by either A, suffering ongoing targeting by criminals, or B, having to give up selling them for the sake of their own safety? Talk about adding insult to injury. Hearing the minister, says Matt, talk about reducing robberies at dairies, this would just displace the problem, as if just selling them at liquor stores, then they will be targeted. However, if you get the number of liquor stores targeted for cigarettes, the offences will be higher as they sell alcohol. This will only increase if they're the only ones selling cigarettes. To really stop it, cigarettes must only be sold at supermarkets, as they have more security, usually a guard, and difficult to target due to the numbers of people. And David says, well, the government has now shown how bankrupt it is. If there's a problem with cigarette thefts, the answer is not to suggest changing sales to liquor stores. Come on, government, tackle the far wider issue. Several months out from an election, government seems unable to join the dots. Not good enough. We'll have an interview with the minister after the news at 6 o'clock. Thank you for being with us at 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. An emergency housing provider says he felt intimidated by an email from the Ministry of Social Development telling providers not to speak to the media without checking with it first. It was sent to 10 agencies by a regional contracts manager who said any requests for interviews must be immediately referred to the ministry. The ministry has since apologised after being approached by Checkpoint, saying the email was not authorised. One provider whose voice has been altered says the email did not make clear the consequences of not obeying the request. He told Checkpoint it smacked of political interference.
The government has had a real focus in the last 12 to 18 months on collaboration, and this just undoes it all. We should have every right to speak on behalf of our homeless families and those living in poverty.
An emergency housing provider. A freshwater ecologist says an official report on the government's new standards for swimmable waterways confirms what he and numerous scientists have been saying all along. The report by NIWA confirms that the standard in the Clean Water Package released in February is less stringent than the 2014 National Policy Statement it's set to replace. NIWA found that under the old standards for E. coli concentrations, only 30% of sites would be rated as swimmable. Under the new standards, 43% would be designated swimmable. Mike Joy of Massey University says it was trickery by the minister to try to convince people the government is being tougher when it's actually weakening limits.
Almost 18 months ago, we came out and said that we need a fund of $100 million a year. And we've done a lot of work since then.
A tourism leader says a new infrastructure fund to help councils pay for more toilets and car parks falls far short of what is needed. The Tourism Minister, Paula Bennett, has announced a $102 million tourism infrastructure fund alongside $76 million in new funding for the Department of Conservation. At the same time, she's ruled out a tourism tax. $60 million of the fund is new money over the next 4 years, but councils will be expected to contribute. Tourism Industry Aotearoa's Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the fund recognises the problem, but it's well below its own estimates.
Almost 18 months ago, we came out and said that we need a fund of $100 million a year. And we've done a lot of work since then, and that work has really just reinforced that we think the problem is still of that level. So we're still some way from that with this announcement.
Chris Roberts says it's up to councils and DOC to show they need more when they pitch for funding. The White House has been vigorously defending Donald Trump's sacking of the FBI Director James Comey, saying he'd made a series of missteps and mistakes over the past few months and it no longer had confidence in him to do the job. Mr. Comey had been investigating alleged links between the US president's campaign and Russia. The BBC's Nick Bryant has more.
Donald Trump had considered firing James Comey since the day he was elected. According to the White House, and had ended up losing all confidence in the former FBI director. A spokeswoman for the president claimed Comey had committed atrocities in circumventing the chain of command. But the Democrats claim his sacking is about the inquiry into Russian meddling and possible collusion with the Trump campaign, an investigation that Comey had reportedly sought more funding for just days before he unexpectedly lost his job.
Nick Bryant in Washington. A Piha resident says he's relieved that the police have arrested someone in connection with the fires that have plagued the West Auckland community. A 19-year-old Piha man was arrested today after a spate of deliberately lit fires destroyed bush and a local fish and chip shop over the last week. Adam May, who lives behind the shop, says he hopes now he'll be able to sleep in peace.
I was sleeping 30 metres away from the fire. So if the wind was facing a different direction, people could have died. So yeah, I feel relieved and more safe. My girlfriend's felt quite uneasy about this as well, probably more than me.
Adam May, a Piha resident. The police say the arrested man will face 3 arson charges and 1 burglary charge in the Tauranga District Court tomorrow. New houses in South Dunedin will have to be built up to a metre higher because of the 2015 flood. The Dunedin City Council has announced the floors of all new homes built in flood-prone areas must be at least 40 centimetres higher than where the floodwaters reached. 1,250 properties were damaged in South Dunedin, Kaikarai Valley and the Taieri Plain by the flooding in June 2015. The Council's General Manager of Community Services, Simon Pickford, says the Council is just being prudent.
When people make an investment in a home, it's significant. It's perhaps the most significant investment you're going to make. What we're doing is trying to provide some surety for that investment so that when people build, they know they've got something which is going to be safe within a 50-year flood event.
Simon Pickford says the decision will only affect about a dozen new houses a year, but will change the height of the city's lowest areas over time. It's 6:05. Crusaders coach Scott Robinson says Saturday's all-New Zealand derby against the Hurricanes is what Super Rugby is crying out for. The Super Rugby competition's diluted system has been in dire straits this season, with New Zealand teams dominating their overseas opponents. New Zealand derbies, however, have been one of the few highlights, and Saturday's game will be the first derby since the Blues-Hurricanes game in mid-April. While Robertson acknowledges a lot is at stake for the top-of-the-table Crusaders, the game itself will have huge importance.
We understand what's at stake and the expectations on both teams. It's going to be a great game, and that's what Super Rugby needs, and some quality players and world-class players actually. So yeah, it's exciting.
The Crusaders coach Scott Robertson. The former Team New Zealand skipper Dean Barker is adamant this year's America's Cup will be more than a 2-yacht race. Barker was at the helm in 2013 when Team New Zealand infamously lost to Cup holders Oracle Team USA after leading 8-1. Now in charge of Team Japan, Barker told Checkpoint the Cup qualifiers, which start in Bermuda later this month, will be a lot tighter than 4 years ago.
If you're on the pace in terms of speed, then it really does come down to how well you sail the boat around the course. And we've seen a lot of close racing. I think at different times, different teams have probably been sailing better than others. And now, here we are 17 days out. We've got one more practice race series next week. And then we're into it.
The Team Japan skipper, Dean Barker. That's the news.
Dear Mum, sorry I haven't written in a while.
We often forget to say the things that count.
Above all, above everyone, was that stupid, miserable little mountain.
To remember the good times.
Almost certainly either a cream donut or a chocolate lamington.
And not so good.
Have you seen Dad lately?
A tribute to all mothers. Dear Mum, written and read by Steve Braunius. After the news at 8, Monday to Friday this week in Nights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Warnings and watches are in force for the North Island, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Periods of rain with localised downpours spreading from the west today. Thunderstorms and gales from Northland to Bay of Plenty tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered rain becoming widespread tomorrow with localised downpours, especially about the ranges. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, rain with heavy falls easing to scattered showers tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura Coast, occasional rain, clearing this evening, fine tomorrow. Canterbury and the Kaikoura Coast, cloudy periods and a few showers. Bulla and Westland rain and possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers this afternoon and becoming fine tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine spells and a few showers, and the Chatham Islands, rain developing tonight, heavy for a time tomorrow. It's coming up to 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina Batten. Hurricanes Crusaders, cracker of a game.
Oh, be great.
Wonderful.
And we win.
Boy, it'll be tight. Could only allowing cigarettes to be sold in R18 locations like liquor stores stop the rise of violent tobacco-hungry dairy thieves? Frustrated dairy owners say price hikes are making cigarettes more and more enticing for thieves to sell on the black market, and they're sick of being targeted. One dairy owner is considering quitting his business altogether. Aggravated robberies, we showed them at the beginning of the program, some of them really violent. So what is the government going to do about this, and is there anything it can do? Obviously the police need to get involved more, lots of people are saying. But I spoke to Associate Health Minister Nikki Wagner and asked how she thinks the government can stop dairies being robbed for cigarettes.
We're within a rock and a hard place, basically. We know that smoking is the biggest killer of New Zealanders. Do you know that 12 people a day die of smoking-related diseases? That's somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 a year. We also know that price is the biggest deterrent for smokers, and more importantly, stops people starting to smoke. So we know that price is key. The second thing is that we know that price, and the more expensive the item is, the more attractive it is to thieves. Robberies have always focused on cigarettes, going back forever, often alcohol as well, again, small items that are high priced, and we get spates of robberies. They seem to come in waves, and I'm the MP for Christchurch Central, so I know that.
Yes, there's been a few done there. Yes, in fact, I was just looking at them. So there have been dairies that have been targeted.
Absolutely, and I've been working with the police on those issues, and basically it boils down to the fact that if you have more expensive products that you're selling, you need greater security, and so the police are working with these small businesses to make sure that their businesses are the hardest target and they're the most secure. And sometimes it's as simple as taking off things from the windows so people can see, and as knowing the neighbours and watching out for suspicious people. And sometimes it's more expensive with CCTV cameras and things like that. I think in the big picture, what we're trying to do is to get people to quit smoking. And as those numbers of people go down, of course, the attractiveness of cigarettes will go down as well. So in the very big picture, if we're looking about smoke-free by 2025, maybe dairies won't carry cigarettes. I do know that some already have decided that it's not worth it.
But in the meantime, there is a sense, and we are talking to dairy owners for whom robbery is now a routine event.
Yes, and I think that the police understand that and are working with it. And you are aware, of course, of the increased police numbers that have been promised by this government, and that the focus on gangs, on robberies, on things that are on the street, and having police to help with that is very strong. I think they're connected, but we certainly need to look at other ways of supporting people to give up smoking as well.
Okay. And look, I totally agree with you, and I'm sure everyone listening agrees with you, but it's a separate conversation, isn't it? In the meantime, how do we protect these dairy owners from...
as I say, I think it's working closely with the police and the neighbourhood, and if they feel too threatened, maybe they don't carry cigarettes.
So are you saying that actually it's time for dairies to consider not selling cigarettes because the risk of having them in the store is too great?
I'm saying that dairies should look at the stock that they carry, they should look at the value of the stock, they should match their security to the value of their stock, and that some dairies have decided they don't want to carry cigarettes.
Who should be selling them?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should sell them with alcohol, because you know that the security systems on an alcohol convenience store is usually much higher than a dairy. There is a difference between the two. Maybe they should go there.
So R18 premises?
I think so. I mean, they can't be sold to under 18 years anyway.
Yeah, right.
So that's a possibility. But again, you see, the issue here is that quite a few dairy owners make a lot of money out of cigarettes, so they don't want to stop selling them.
Nikki Wagner, Associate Health Minister. So we put all of that to a dairy owner in Auckland who last month was targeted by an organised team of 5 youths at 6 in the morning. Raj Patel from Avondale Food Market says they ran away with around $7,000 worth of loose tobacco. But despite that, would he consider stopping selling cigarettes?
Tell her to go and run the dairy and then stops selling cigarettes in her own bloody dairy, and then she will know.
Do you reckon that she'd be able to run her own dairy without cigarettes?
She won't. It's easy for her to say because, she's on a higher position,
So you're saying that without cigarettes you would struggle?
Yeah, nobody will come to my shop unless everybody else has stopped. The whole country stopped selling cigarettes,
How much money do you make off a pack of cigarettes?
We make about 10%, but 10% is a lot of money, because it's the instant money, We buy it today and sell it within 2 days, 3 days gone. It's very quick money, really.
Yeah, quick money. It's the best money that you can make, right?
I mean, they come and buy a packet. Every time they buy a cigarette, they buy a lighter. And we make 150% on a lighter, And they go and buy a drink. Then they go and buy a zigzag paper. They buy a filter. We make 100% on that.
Raj Patel from the Avondale Food Market. The police have just got back to us about the robbery at Raj's store. More than a month on, no arrests have been made. The footage of the robbery was up. It is online. If you recognise any of those people, although they were all fairly well covered, do contact the police. The High Court has been told the level of originality in a song by the American rapper Eminem is important in deciding whether copyright had been breached in a similar sounding piece of music. The musician's publishing company, 8 Mile Style, is suing the National Party over its use of music accused of being similar to Eminem's song Lose Yourself in its 2014 election advertising. Lawyers today began delivering their closing address in Wellington. Here's our court reporter Anne-Marie May.
Earlier in the trial, the court heard the music used in the National Party advertising had been sourced from a production company music library and was titled Eminem-esque. In his closing address, the National Party's lawyer Greg Arthur told Justice Cull that to have breached copyright, the Eminem-esque track must have copied a substantial part of the rapper's original song. To illustrate that, Mr. Arthur referred to earlier copyright judgments, including one which said copyright would be infringed if the music that formed a whole melody was taken.
On the other hand, to take the bars in a different order or broken by the intersection of other bars will not necessarily be an infringement. Infringement depends upon whether the air or melody taken is substantially the same as the original. And then in the next paragraph, determining an infringement is not a question of note-for-note comparison, but of whether the substance of the original copyright work is taken.
Mr. Arthur said the basic musical structure of Eminem's song was not original, and so if that was all that was used in Eminem-esque, then there had been no copying of what made the rapper's song original.
That's the distinction between harmonies and the melody. The basic building blocks, in this case I would say that's the guitar piece, in itself is not original. It's only the melody within that guitar piece that starts to become original.
Mr. Arthur said a lot of songs have similar syncopated guitar playing and chord progressions to Eminem's work, but it's the melody in Lose Yourself that makes it distinguishable. He said esque soundtracks are used in music libraries through the world. For example, Beyoncé-esque to show the music with that title would be similar to that of Beyoncé. Mr. Arthur said the music industry is one of borrowing, and that had been even acknowledged by Jeff Bass, one of the composers of Lose Yourself, and he quoted from Mr. Bass's evidence earlier in the trial.
That music evolves from the legacy of others, and that there is a history of borrowing musical building blocks. This includes borrowing drum patterns, chord patterns, guitar strum techniques, and sounds of an instrument.
Greg Arthur also referred to criticism Jeff Bass had made of National's advertising track as weak and light. He said that was because the track did not replicate the parts of Eminem's composition which gave it its originality. The lawyer for 8 Mile Style will make his closing address tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
We look forward to that closing address. It's coming up to 6:18. Labor is promising to inject more than $40 million to provide free primary mental health care through GP practices if it wins the election. Labor leader Andrew Little made the pledge at a primary healthcare summit hosted by the party at Parliament. Our health correspondent Karen Brown was there.
Last month, Action Station released a report containing stories of over 500 people who have had experience with the mental health system. A large number of people said they weren't getting help.
I don't know if you know Karen Brown's voice, but if you do, you will know that that was not Karen Brown filing a story on the primary healthcare. We're going to go to something else now. I'm just sitting here actually reading some feedback from Kirsten McKenzie saying that they used to sell gold and it kept getting pinched from them and they had to completely redo our businesses. Dairies, they're between a rock and a hard place, right? Because they make reasonable money out of selling cigarettes, but there is increasing risk. Lots of feedback about that tonight. Thank you. It's lovely to hear from you. Let's go to James Comey. Donald Trump has defended firing FBI Director James Comey as accusations mount that his ousting was intended to undermine an agency probe into his presidential campaign's possible collusion with Russia. Senior Democrats are today continuing to press for an independent investigation into the Russia issue. For his part, the US president says Mr. Comey had lost the confidence of almost everyone in Washington, Republican and Democrat alike. When things calm down, said Mr. Trump, they will be thanking me. The BBC's John Campbell reports.
This is a Fox News alert. FBI Director James Comey has been fired by the President of the United States.
The term breaking news is bandied around with abandon. Last night it was justified, because at FBI offices, the first they knew that their director had been fired was when it flashed up on their TV screens. And James Comey, who was in Los Angeles addressing staff, knew nothing about it either until an aide handed him a note. Today the President was unrepentant.
Why did you fire Director Comey?
Because he wasn't doing a good job, very simply. He was not doing a good job.
James Comey, the 6'8" tall FBI director, was the person who confirmed in bombshell testimony in March that the Trump campaign was under investigation for its links to Russia during the election.
The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
The President has railed consistently that it's fake news and there's been no improper contact. Last night, he fired the man heading the inquiry. It's caused fury and dismay among some Republicans and all Democrats.
We know Director Comey was leading an investigation in whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians, a serious offense. Were those investigations getting too close to home for the President? The dismissal of Director Comey establishes a very troubling pattern.
And Democrats have wasted no time in drawing parallels with the dark days of the Nixon presidency, when Richard Nixon in 1973 fired the special prosecutor investigating him over the break-in at the Watergate building. It was known as the Saturday Night Massacre. A year later, Nixon would resign. For special prosecutor then, insert FBI director today. But the White House is seeking to persuade people that the decision to fire Comey had nothing to do with Russia or the FBI investigation.
It was time for a fresh start at the FBI. And I think the President did, as he's done in so many other cases. He took decisive action. He provided strong leadership to act on the recommendation of the Deputy Attorney General.
The White House says the loss of confidence stems from James Comey's investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server from when she was Secretary of State.
I made a mistake using a private email.
He decided last July there'd be no prosecution, just a rap on the knuckles. Republicans were furious. Then, stunningly, he reopened his inquiry 11 days before polling.
It took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made.
But if it really is all about the way the FBI conducted the Hillary Clinton investigation, why sack him now? Why this intervention? Why not do it when Donald Trump first came to office? And how do you reconcile it with the praise that was heaped upon James Comey? Whatever, it's left the FBI feeling very sore about the way their director's been treated. And into the Washington maelstrom, who should arrive today for his first visit to see the Trump administration? Why, none other than Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in jokey mood.
Was he fired? You are kidding.
He then went to meet Donald Trump at the White House. But curiously, for the camera-loving president, the press was kept away. This feels like House of Cards on steroids.
John Campbell. Let's return to the piece we lost before. This is Karen Brown on Andrew Little promising more money for mental health care.
Mr Little told GPs, nurses and others that there's a crisis in the mental health system. He said it's not accessible to many, so Labor will make it a priority if it leads the next government. He said the country's high teen suicide rate is just one indicator of the underlying problem.
In many places, the police are now one of the most common frontline mental health services in our communities, and that's not right.
He said Labor would fund a 2-year pilot to launch 8 community-based specialist teams to provide faster and more effective mental health treatment to 40,000 people each year. The teams would offer free, accessible help from GP practices. The needs of individual communities would determine where the teams are based, but Christchurch is definitely on the list because of its high post-quake demand for services.
Primary health organisations, NGOs and DHBs will work together to select locations for the teams based on the needs in different parts of the country.
Last week, the Health Minister Jonathan Coleman acknowledged that mental health had become a huge issue and said more needed to be done. But he says Labor has copied its policy from others and it's short on detail.
Who's actually going to do this extra work? Where are they going to get the extra resources from? And as usual, all there is available publicly is a one-page sketch, but it's someone else's proposal. So it doesn't sound like there's a lot of thought, original thought.
At the summit, the Platform Trust, which represents NGOs, said there's a high and rising need for more mental health care in the community. Its chief executive, Marion Blake, said GPs are the ones who have to deal with a myriad of problems.
About drug and alcohol issues, about domestic violence, about how your 14-year-old daughter is cutting, or just to give you a bit of help around managing your autistic child.
She said mental health support workers saw 60,000 people in the community last year.
They saw those people at the behest of a district health board. Imagine if they were able to be accessed by general practice. We could double. We could see 120,000 people. So it's because our systems are not aligned. So it's not rocket science. It actually just doesn't fit the funding model.
Mental health is an issue across the socio-economic spectrum. Susan Iverson of the Hutt Union Community Health Service near Wellington said the non-profit group is providing care to those at the bottom of the heap who can't get help elsewhere.
We've been running a deficit now for the last 4 to 5 years, and this year it's no longer going to be sustainable. We're now going to have to start cutting services to those patients, and I really am saying this is the very highest need group of people.
The government has promised more money for mental health in this month's budget, but won't say how much. Its $321 million social investment package will include an investment in mental health services, although critics are worried it will be narrowly focused on only helping those who fit a narrow definition of those needing help. For Checkpoint, Karen Brown.
Let's go to Dunedin now because Ed Sheeran is going to, and so many people want to go to his concert that there's already a rush on motels and hotels. In fact, all the accommodation's gone. He's just announced the concert at Dunedin's Covered Stadium, March 29th next year. Tickets aren't even on sale yet, but the town is sold out. Here's our Otago Southland reporter Ian Telfer.
Well, me, I fall in love with you every single day. Suddenly, everyone in Dunedin's an Ed Sheeran fan, even people who'd never heard of him before yesterday. Motel owners like Sue Rhodes are delighted. Her Portobello motel on the Otago Peninsula, 20 kilometres from the CBD, was sold out in a flash.
We opened up the computer at about 8 o'clock and discovered that everything was booked out for the 29th of March. We had double bookings. The bookings had come in from 7:30 to 7:43. So it was a 13-minute window when everybody booked.
Ms Rhodes, who also heads the Otago Motel Association, says by late yesterday only 2 out of the city's 50 motels had any rooms left. Rick Meader from the Commodore Motel in North Dunedin says the phone started ringing at 7 a.m. yesterday and didn't stop.
You think about All Black Test matches and what have you, this is busier than that. I feel it's busier than the Elton John concert. The number of people that Ed Sheeran goes to, like everybody likes Ed Sheeran, right from your teenager right through to your grandma. So there's thousands and thousands of people that will be thinking to themselves, are we going to go? How are we going to get there? Where are we going to stay? And that's where we come in.
The speed at which the city filled up has prompted questions about whether Dunedin has enough rooms to handle a concert like this. But Rick Meader says it does. He reckons it'll all shake out in the months ahead.
It's been a bit of a panic at this stage. It's not a full city by any stretch, and it won't be when we get round to the actual time as well. The tickets haven't even gone on sale yet, so people are booking accommodation and they don't even have tickets, and if they don't get tickets then they'll cancel their accommodation.
The Dunedin City Council's destination manager, Ryan Craig, says the city does have enough accommodation. He says there are about 6,300 tourist beds, plus holiday homes and rooms available through accommodation websites like Airbnb, plus families and friends.
We can jump to conclusions. The accommodation and hospitality sector in Dunedin are well versed in hosting big events like this in the city. I'm sure they're going to be able to deliver.
If it sells 40,000 seats, the concert will be the biggest held at Dunedin's covered stadium since it opened 6 years ago. There have been grumbles about false promises of luring big acts, but it's unlikely Elton John, Fleetwood Mac and now Sheeran would have come without it. Dunedin Airport's Chief Executive, Richard Roberts, says he takes his hat off to the stadium company Dunedin Venues Management.
It's just incredible. I mean, I think it's the message that it's going to now send around the world when old Ed Sheeran sat there having his, quiet afternoon morning tea smoker with Beyonce and saying, talking about this really cool place in Dunedin with a roof on. Then, I don't know, is she going to be next? I think it really puts it on the map. And Terry and the guys at DVML, wow, what an amazing job. I'm just so proud of those guys.
If the Ed Sheeran love holds up, this fuzzy Yorkshire balladeer could get the keys to the city. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Nice, Ian. And that is Checkpoint for tonight. On behalf of the staff on the most listened to program in New Zealand in its time slot, our wonderful team, thank you for being with us. That doesn't even include the people watching either. By golly, delighted to have your company however you have joined us. We will be back tomorrow night at 5. Until then, a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. An emergency housing provider says he felt intimidated by the Ministry of Social Development telling providers not to speak to the media without checking first. A scientist says it's trickery to try to convince people new standards for swimmable waterways are tough when limits have actually been weakened. The US House Oversight Chairman has asked the Justice Department to expand an inquiry into the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. A tourism leader says a new fund to help councils pay for more toilets and car parks falls short of what's needed. And a man is to appear in court in connection with 2 fires in Piha in West Auckland. Our next news and weather is at 7.
John Wesley Harding. Is it a Bob Dylan album or the name of an English songwriter